Amanda from Pontes Books, here with the historical tidbit for chapter 11 of The Prince and the Pauper. Today's detail is a pretty small one that just gets mentioned, but it's one that I know when I was teaching the book, I kind of breezed over and didn't really know much about it. So I kind of wanted to dig into it to figure out for myself what this means. And if you're from London or spend a lot of time in London, maybe you knew this reference. I did not. So our reference for today is Gog and Magog. So you can see in the picture here, these are kind of some statues, some effigies. I guess statues aren't really the right word, of some giants. So that's going to be related to who they were and the significance they have in London. So the reference in The Prince and the Pauper, we can see this quote here. It's kind of setting up the beginning of the banquet. So in chapter 11, we kind of see, it's almost like a split chapter. So for part of the chapter, we see Tom inside the guild hall having this, fancy meal. And then we also see Edward outside of the palace, kind of in the chaos that is surrounding the palace. And then some pretty big happens. So here's the reference. At a lower table, the court grandees and other guests of noble degrees were seated with the magnates of the city. The commoners took places at a multitude of tables on the main floor of the hall. From their lofty vantage ground, the giants, Gog and Magog, the ancient guardians of the city, contemplated the spectacle below them, with eyes grown familiar to it in forgotten generations. So that Gog and Magog part, I was like, I don't really know what that means, but cool. So now I wanted to look into it a little bit more. So who were Gog and Magog? So there are basically traces of them in like many different mythologies, and there's legends and all sorts of things that you can trace, but we're kind of looking at specifically like how does this kind of relate to this story and to London. But a couple of facts about kind of who they were. So sometimes they were called Gog Magog and Coriolanus. So there are some different myths surrounding like who these giant statues represent, and kind of the story leading up to them. So I'll kind of present one, but there's other ones. So there's different alternate kind of names that can come up here too. But essentially what it boils down to is they're two kind of monstrous giants, two giants. Diocletian, I think is how you pronounce that, was a Roman empire, and he had 33 wicked daughters. And so they were sent to an island called Albion, which later became Britain, or was also named Britain after Brutus, who we'll get to him in a second, was also somebody who ended up there. So they basically, again, there's a couple different myths for where this comes from, but one of the myths is that Gog and Magog were offspring of these 33 wicked daughters. So that's kind of, we'll focus on that version, I guess, but there are other ones as well. So why did they become London's guardians? So like I said, they were on this island that later became Britain, named for Brutus. So Brutus also landed on this island, and he's from Rome. And he was, I forget now, either the grandson or the great-grandson of Aeneas after the Trojan War. So kind of going back to other ancient civilizations. And so as one of the stories goes, he tamed Gog and Magog. Sorry, that's a typo. That should say Magog, not Magogi. And forced them to be guardians of the city by chaining them outside of his palace. His palace is now what is Guildhall, and the city, which was then New Troy that he founded, is now London. So they were the guardians of the city even before London became London, and that tradition kind of just carried on. So there are some traditions that still exist, like you could see in that picture, where they have these effigies of Gog and Magog that they walk through the city and keep this tradition going. And then just specifically, in this passage where it was referenced that the, giant Gog and Magog overlook the meal that they're having at the Guildhall, these are the statues that are in Guildhall. So I thought that was a fun fact. That was something that I didn't know before. So Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.